by Pippi Ardenia. Thank you. All right. So my name is Guy Odishaw. I'm here the second Sunday every other month. And I've been talking about non-dual awareness. So this is going to continue that series. But a little different perspective on it today. So I've been talking about it a little more kind of conceptually, trying to communicate an idea of what it is from the perspective of having realized, from being in the perspective of non-dual awareness. Today, I want to talk about non-dual awareness, a thumbnail sketch of the perspective, but then to really look at it from how it is from the dualistic perspective. So how do we, those of us who just walk around as a conventional ego, a separate self, how are we taking this to be versus what that perspective is like when we've realized the actual non-dual perspective on reality? So some of the ways I've talked about this in the past is I've used the metaphor of space, so that space is continuous. So even though space is divided by the walls, and we think of this room and that room, and these are separate rooms, and they're in our mind, and we talk about them and reference them and live, a reality that says that they are different spaces. The metaphor is to relate to the space itself, not that which appears to divide it. So not relating to the walls and the difference we make up in our mind, but to understand that space is continuous, uninterrupted, right? That you cannot break the field of space. And so to relate to space as a metaphor for non-dual reality, the perspective that says we are not separate. As much as we seem like separate people, or it seems like there are separate rooms in this building, or even that this building is separate from the space outside this building, even though it seems that way, that space is continuous. So just say the same thing, even though we seem like separate people, we're not two. That we are non-different in the sense of our true nature is one. There is one true nature. There is one space that has been divided up into subsets of that space, but is continuous. So another metaphor that I've used is the idea of water, and that water is equally wet. Whether you're talking about a cup of water, or Lake Harriet, or the Great Lakes, the water is equally wet. And it is a truth about water, and we say the same thing about true nature. Right? That true nature is equally true nature no matter where it is, no matter what person or other being or manifest object is arising, that it is equally true nature in the same way that water is equally wet. So again, these are metaphors for this idea, right, that there is this sameness that is continuous across all existence. And the invitation of the non-dual teaching is to relate to the sameness and not to the difference. But we as separate selves chronically relate to the difference and take the difference to be real, and we kind of just don't even see the sameness. It doesn't factor in. We're so focused on difference, and all of our thinking and ways of being are organized around the difference, the contrast, that the sameness is just eclipsed. So the whole of the non-dual teachings could be considered just an invitation to see, recognize, and come to value the sameness. But one of the things that happens in this is then a sense that difference is bad or wrong, or some fantasy that difference will go away. And so a thing that always comes up in students who take on the non-dual path is at some point some sense that that they themselves will disappear, or that the world as they know it will disappear, because if difference goes away, if separateness goes away, then there's only like a homogeneous, kind of bland oneness, and that seems very uninteresting to the separate self. It feels threatened by it. So this is one of many kind of misconceptions that arises in the separate self when we approach this idea of our true nature, and really coming to touch the ground of our true nature. It seems to threaten our individuality. So that's kind of what I want to take a look at today, is one of the ways that we do this as a separate self. One of the ways that our mind kind of wraps itself around this and operates on the basis of it. So we're going to try and root that out and take a look at it and see if, well, hopefully in just seeing that it's there, to seeing that is operative in you, begins to offer the choice of another perspective. Of seeing that you're having this one perspective gives you a chance to step away from it and consider another perspective, which you can't do if you don't know that you're chronically doing this thing. So we're going to see if we can get to that. So, kind of using two words here to talk about these two perspectives. So the two words are going to be kind of discrimination, or discriminating awareness, also called discerning awareness. So there's discriminating awareness and judgment. And we'll say that discriminating awareness is a quality of true nature. So it's an inherent quality of true nature. And judgment is how the ego enacts that same quality. So judgment is what the ego does. Inherent discrimination is what true nature does. Right? So these are our two things we're going to focus on. So when I get into this area, one of my favorite quotes that seems to pertain is from Mark Twain. Right? And it goes something like this, if I can paraphrase. "This man knows a great deal, but most of what he knows ain't true." So this is one of my own personal mantras, that I just remind myself that no matter how much I think I know, most of what I think I know isn't true. Right? And this leads me to kind of my next mantra, and one of the things that I invite my students to consider and hopefully practice is stop believing yourself. Right? It's like one of the most important things that you can do as a person engaged in kind of personal growth, spiritual work, is stop believing yourself. Stop believing what you're always thinking. Because most of what you're thinking isn't true. So that's what we're going to try and get into today, and look at and find out, like me saying that, is that actually true? You know, is there any veracity to that such that you should consider it, or can you just set it aside as something goofy that this guy said that doesn't really rate paying attention to? We want to look into that, and if it seems to pertain, great. And if it arises to you that it doesn't pertain, then you should set it aside. Right? So this idea of discriminating awareness, right, is that there is difference within the arising of true nature. Right? That true nature is not a homogeneous whole that is just sameness without contrast. That's not the case. That true nature has the capacity to arise in different forms. And it is authentically itself. It has not lost its authenticity by becoming something. Right? So this is a quality, an aspect, an attribute that we say is naturally existing within true nature. Right? So that difference does exist. So within the ego, through this series of events that happen within our psyche, what the ego makes out of that is judgment. Right? So it sees difference, but within that, it develops a preference. And preference isn't in and of itself bad or wrong. Right? You can have a preference, But the ego doesn't simply have a preference. I prefer chocolate ice cream versus vanilla, right? And then it's just an orientation towards chocolate. What the ego tends to do, and this is where the quality of judgment comes in, is not only do I have a preference for one thing, but I have an aversion to the other thing. Right? And then I make the other thing bad, wrong, less than, a problem that needs to be dealt with. Right? So that's where this difference of what judgment is comes in. So discriminating awareness, kind of taking a whole and making it into parts, and being able to orient towards a part and to understand it and relate to it. Perfectly fine quality. Nothing wrong with it. Where it goes awry is when we hold something against the other parts. Right? And so it's probably not much of a leap here. I'm sure this is in your own minds. You're already seeing how we're doing this in the world, but there's some political stuff going on these days, right? And you can see, listen to, not only do people speak, am I for this, but I'm against that. And then much of the conversation becomes not so much an expression of what I'm for, but what I'm against, and why you should be against it too, and why that needs to be vilified. Right? And so there's a great deal of energy that is put into that. Right? And so that's the quality of the ego and the separate self that we want to look at today. Right? All of that activity that is generated on an absence of this perspective, this understanding of non-dual reality. Right? That we have, because I think that I'm separate, I feel threatened. Right? Just at the base, I feel threatened. And then from that place of threatened, I feel that there's territory I need to defend. There's at least me, and then this can expand to then, kind of my people, are on this side, and we need to be protected. And the other side, whoever the not me is, whoever the other is a threat against me and mine and what I have. And so I need to actively protect myself against that threat. And this is at the core of this quality of this thing that I'm talking about today, judgment. And so what we want to do is we're going to do an exercise here, try and get in touch with this quality and to see how pervasive it is. Right? To be just walking down the street and seeing, on the drive over here, I see people are out, they're gardening. And you see flowers. And maybe there's a flower you like, and there's a sense of, oh, what a beautiful flower, and that's great, and there should be more of those. They should do their whole yard in those, whatever the thought is, but there's that sense of affinity and preference for that. But then maybe, right next to it, there's another flower that you see that you don't like. And you immediately have the thought of, why are they planting that? That's terrible. That's a weed. That's just going to get in everything and it's going to ruin it. They should not do that. That's bad. And in an instant, you have had that entire judgment over something that doesn't matter in the least to you in your life. You're just driving by, but your mind just does it. It just does it automatically. It's chronic. You see a person, and immediately there's a string of what you know about them, right? Just in like the Mark Twain quote, right? Immediately there's all of the judgment that come from how they're dressed, their skin color, their how they are standing, where they're standing, and you make all of these judgments about them, and most of that happens unconsciously. You're not even aware that your mind is dividing the world up into this I like and I don't like, and then spending a good amount of time fortifying the rationale for why I like and justifying that and feeling good about it, but equally spending time fortifying the why that shouldn't be liked and should be at least contained, if not eradicated. So this is the activity we want to try and look into and try and see what is the basis of this? Why do I invest so much energy in this every moment of every day? And well, what I want you to do is find out the answer to that. I have suggested that the answer to it is the absence of contact with true nature. That all of us, moment to moment, do not have direct access to the wholeness and the oneness of being. And in not having that contact, we then feel separate and alone and isolated. And from there comes this whole activity. So we can follow the activity to the presumption of the loss, and then we can fall through that to the underlying truth, which is we're never separate. Just like space is never divided and water is equally wet, we are never separate. So this is a truth, but it's a truth that has to be lived in order for it to be effective. If it's conceptual, and for many folks, having it conceptually would be a giant leap forward. But even conceptually, it doesn't solve the problem. So in the traditions, they talk about this as the problem here. The root of the problem is avidya, which I like to use that word because it's more neutral. Right? It's a Sanskrit word, and none of us know what it means, so it's avidya. Right? So it's safe. But a way to translate it is ignorance. Right? And then that immediately becomes a pejorative word, and nobody wants to be called ignorant, and maybe most of us don't want to call anybody ignorant. And so it's a tough one, right? So that's the common translation of vidya translated to ignorance. We could think of it as, I think, a little bit more comfortable language is wrong knowledge. Right? So again, back to the Mark Twain quote. Right? So it's just wrong knowledge. Many of us are equipped with a great deal of wrong knowledge, right? That it, and so we think of it that way. So there's a group of Swiss scientists that have started this program, and it's called the Global Ignorance Project. And I'm a huge fan that they've used the word ignorance and that they've taken this on as an authentic scientific study. Right? Amazing work. And one among many, but one of the things they do is they survey people around the world, and they compare people's answers to these set of questions over against the results produced by chimpanzees. Right? So that's the control group, is chimpanzees. Now, what you might imagine with the chimpanzees, when presented with these questions, they always come up around 50%, right? Chance. That's it. And so one would imagine that because they don't understand the questions, and they have two choices of buttons, yes or no, and 50-50, right? Now, you might expect that people would do better because we are rational and we can think and we can read the questions and understand them, but actually no. Right? So what do they find consistently around the world? That people, when presented with the same set of questions, score somewhere between 6 and 12%. 6 and 12% over against the chimpanzees, who are consistently 50%. So humanity is consistently getting our butts kicked by chimpanzees. Doesn't say much for us, right? But it actually does, right? And totally worth looking into the philosophy, the gestalt behind this program. But what they're trying to show is to scientifically prove Mark Twain's quote. Right? We all know a great deal, but most of what we know is wrong. Right? This is what they're trying to prove to us. And they have a great, scientists, they have the rationale for why it is. And nobody's at fault. They're not blaming people. They're just saying, look, the mechanism that we're using isn't as good as we think it is. That's it. That's all they're trying to say is, in a sense, what I said earlier. Stop believing what you think. the mechanism is faulty. Right? And if you can come to see that, if you can come to see that the way that you make truth, the way you make meaning, doesn't work very well, then you'll consider finding a new way. And so that's why I'm a fan of their program. What they're taking on is really trying to bring to people a scientific argument for why to stop believing what you're thinking. So we're going to try our own approach for that today and look into this mechanism, and if you can maybe get a sense that it might have a few flaws that are worth investigating. They do in the talk. There's a TED talk that they do that summarizes a lot of this, and in there you'll see the questions. But there's more in their program to engage than just that. But it's a nice condensed nugget. Yeah, get the gist of what they're up to. So I'm going to give you some questions. And so if you have something to write this down, you can write it down. If you don't worry about it. I'll give you the question again as often as you need it. For those of you who have done this, I know you're relaxed and at ease. Those of you who haven't done it, you might be feeling a little anxious. It's not painful. It might even be fun and hopefully illuminating. So, find your questions. And I'll go through how to do the exercise, but I'll give you the questions first. So first question is, what is right about being good? What is right about being good? And the second, tell me something that is wrong. Tell me something that is wrong. And so what these questions are really trying to activate here is the mechanism of judgment. Right? So we're using the words of judgment, good, wrong. Right? And so we want the question to bring that up, to bring up your inner judge that is always doing this, going around all the time, always deciding what is good and what is bad. And where are you in the spectrum, and trying to figure it out, right? So in most of us, there's a high drive in the social self to be good, or at least be seen as good, and to not be wrong, or to not be seen as wrong. Because the penalty is social exclusion, which, if you're separate, is intolerable, right? You have to be part of the group. You have to be, in the tribe, because that's where the resources are. If you're outside the tribe, there are no resources, and that means difficulty or death. Right? So we're deeply programmed with this compass that is always trying to get us to navigate, to belong to the group so we can get the goods. And that's where our judgment is. But again, as you start to look into it, you'll find out that it is perhaps lost its boundaries around operating in a kind of a minimal, optimal way. Because again, you go to yoga class and you're looking around and you're judging that person's pose, or that person's yoga outfit, or that person's yoga mat. And it's the wrong color, it's the wrong texture, it's too big, it's taking up too much space. They're not doing downward dog right. It's chronic, this self-comparison, kind of judging self and other, right? So this is what we want to look into. So here's how the exercise is going to go. You're going to break into groups of 2, and in a moment you'll shuffle off, get 2 chairs, turn them facing each other, sitting a comfortable distance apart so that you can hear each other. You'll start with the first question. One person is going to ask the question of the other person, and you're just going to ask it repeatedly for 2 minutes. Right? I'm going to keep time for you, so ask it repeatedly for 2 minutes. Then the other person will ask that question for 2 minutes. Then we'll move on to the second question and repeat the cycle. Right? So it goes something like this. First person who's asking the question will ask the question, what is right about being good? The person will answer. And you want to answer really from what comes up. And so maybe the answer is because I'll get a reward. The person who asked the question says thank you and asks the question again. What is right about being good? Answer, thank you. What is right about being good? They answer, thank you. And that's the question. And the person being asked, you want to try and let the question penetrate and take you deep within. So there's a part of you that's going to want to try and get the question right? Try and come up with the right answer, kind of, or maybe you try and hack the question and figure out like what's it trying to get to, and then just give that answer. So you take a strategic approach instead of being right. You try and be strategic. So that'll happen, and if that happens, just see that and just be like, oh, there's me trying to be smart or try to be seen as good because I'm trying to answer the question in a way that I think my partner thinks the question should be answered so that they think I'm good. If that's happening, you just want to notice that and be like, oh, there it is. Here's the mechanism operating as I'm answering the question. But mostly what I want you to do is just allow yourself to answer the question with whatever's coming up, even if it makes no sense. The goal here is to be present to yourself. That's the goal. To be present to yourself as you're having this opportunity to look inside. And whatever comes up, and that's great. And there's no right, there's no wrong. There's just being with the question. Okay? So, grab a partner, find a space. In a moment, I will start the timer, and away you go. Absolutely, please. Let's maybe. Well, I'm not entirely sure, but we'll find out. John, I'm Guy. Pleased to meet you, John. Better grab the questions here so I don't forget myself. Yes, I mean, in part. There's a little bit more to it, but yes. And what we want to try and do today is to look into some of that chatter specifically, to try and see some of that activity. You could, yeah. So, okay. So the question is, what is right about being good? What is right about being good? And time. Away you go. Because Mama said so.
defining the difference of being bad.
What is right? Thank you. What is right about being good? What is right about being good? What is right about being good?
Okay, so next question. Tell me something that is wrong. Tell me something that is wrong. Okay? What do you do? Thank you. Tell me something that is wrong. Tell me something that is wrong. Tell me something that is wrong.
Yes. How did you guess? I was raised Catholic. I grew Catholic.
All right, come on back in. Thank you. Perfect. Well, what did you find out?
Something that
Excellent. Yeah. Any thoughts, reflections, comments? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes. What a wonderful question. Yeah. Yeah. To really take that on sincerely, to find out. Right? But that's what's missing is a core part of the ego is this sense of certainty that it knows. Like without any support for that. It's just a stance. It's an irrational stance that I know. Well, of course I know. I just know. How do you know? I know. Right? And what we want to do is actually get to that place of the question. So the question opens us up. And that's the goal. So great. I love to hear that happened for you. You arrived at this place of what is the truth. Yeah. Fantastic. Life is a round table of perceptions. Yes. Yeah. So how did that come up in your exercises? I mean, did that kind of
Just thinking of how I perceive life as I've grown from childhood through, the perception of what my family chose to engage me in to what I've done as an adult and what I'm doing now.
Mm-hmm.
Perception has changed and it will continue to change. And you never know when you're not going to something that people,
Yes. Yeah. So how does that feel? Like if you just kind of sit with the knowingness of that.
They're very open.
Yeah. And how does open feel?
Free. Alive. Loving.
Yeah.
Accepting and receiving it. Not just,
Yeah. And I mean, so thank you for sharing both your insight and a little bit of how that your inner state in the moment. But I mean, doesn't that sound like a lovely place to live from? A place that is open and feels alive and a kind of a flowing, an in and out, a give and a take. Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. Yeah.
One of the things that struck me is a piece of information I received is that the ego came about at age 2 or 3 to protect you. And the mind is thinking all of that stuff around self-protection. So that really applies to this because this whole thing we put together is to protect us and we can kind of relax.
Yes. Yeah. So exactly. So
Not take it
it's
so serious.
not take it so seriously. It's all just part of the process. It's a developmental process. So we have again a tendency to kind of want to make it wrong. Spirituality does that. Transcend the ego. Ego death, kill the ego, as if the ego is bad and somehow unnatural and an anomaly. And we can get into this thinking in the language. You can see it in some of the traditions, and really it's just a phase of development. And the only hang up is that many of us just don't recover from it, right? Like I'm fond of saying, like, there's nothing wrong with being 6, right? Like all of us at one point were 5, and then we were 7, but in between there we were 6. And we don't have, like, there's nothing wrong with being 6. It's just if you're 50 and you're acting like you're 6, then that's a problem, right? But the problem isn't 6. Like, it's not like, what we need to do is go and eradicate 6ness. It's like, no, it's like you're 50, just act 50 and make the transition. And that's what's happened here is we were all dependent individuals as infants. But somewhere along the line, we got over that, actually. Right? But in our psyche, we're still acting as if that's not true. And that's a lot of the basis of what we're talking about today, is that the turf war of self-protection, and that as a driver here around this difference between judgment and discriminating awareness. Right? And the natural faculty of discriminating awareness arises in a distorted sense in the ego as judgment and a thing to perpetuate the turf war. So, yeah. What's wrong with it? Well, I mean, we want to be careful around the judgmental side of that, right, and not fall into the judgment side. But from a side of discerning awareness, we can see that when you're 50, you're simply not 6. That's just not true, right? So that's the problem with it is it's not true. You're 50. Now, what is that like? I don't know. Like, we don't want to impose an image, because that's no good. But nor do we want to take something that was historically true and drag it forward in time and act as if, because that's not true either. So we want to actually answer this question that you brought up, is what is true? So what is true about being 50 would be a great inquiry, or whatever age one is, right? What's that? That's a great question. And one ought to look into that with sincerity at whatever age, right? So, right. But the goal of inner child work has to be to come to see that it's not true. That it is a false conception, that there's a part of me who is taking myself to be 4, but that's part of the avidya, the ignorance, because I'm not actually. And what I want to do through inner child work is do enough healing to go, oh yeah, right, sorry about that. To my friends, sorry I've been acting like a 4-year-old, because I'm not actually 4 anymore. Sorry for making you responsible for my child, but I'm actually 47, and like I'll take all that back on me, right? This is our goal, right? Yeah.
I can't resist this. When I was a young man, I used to be in a group, and we had a priest who kind of facilitated the group. And I was asking questions of the spiritual nature, and I would kind of try to get a little deeper. And every time I answered that question, deep question, and the priest would say, oh, John, those are holy mysteries. But that was the answer. It was a holy mystery. And now we're trying to go into that holy mystery.
Yes.
It needs to go in a
Yes. Yes. And you know, from my perspective, I mean, they are holy mysteries, and yet I would rather live in a world where that's what was thought about versus, you know, whatever else is, you know, what is the next cut of pant leg? Should it be wide or narrow? You know, should it, you know, I mean, this is not a topic that I think warrants deep attention. These questions that we're talking about, I think this is what we should talk about, and let the pants fall as they may. You know, just like whatever. You know, it's a boot hugger or not, doesn't matter. There's more important things. We should put our attention there. So, all right. So, to the degree that you want to spend some of your day or week, you know, in the days ahead, I invite you to carry what we talked about here today forward. And have just in the back of your mind, just a very, very, very gentle, loving, compassionate self-observation that is willing to notice when you're doing this thing of judging. And again, what we want to be really, really, really careful with here is not to have our own inner critic, our own inner judge, doing the watching such that we judge ourselves for judging. Right? This is a big risk around this area. Right? So we call that the superego. You don't want your superego doing your watching of your judging, because you'll kick the stuffing out of yourself for doing it. Right? And that's no good. It'll be painful, and it'll just cause more inner harm. Right? So you want to make sure that it is truly your best self, your self who is the seeker who wants to grow and mature, that is noticing in any moment, what am I up to? Oh, I'm up to judging. What's that about? Like, what is the payoff in this moment? And what you want to find is, can you find where you're threatened in the moment? Because that's what it comes down to. So that's your homework, if you feel like doing homework on a lovely Sunday. And Gary's coming to bring the plate around. Thank you, Gary. And there's refreshments in the room next door here, so please stick around. I'm going to be around. If you have questions or comments, want to chat, we can do that. I want to say thank you again for coming, and please stick around. And I will see you on the second